The iQoo 9T and the OnePlus 10T are both in the house, and they both come with the latest flagship, which is the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1. Also, the interesting part is that they're both priced for about the same price tag, which is Rs 50,000. So the question arises, which phone is better between the two? Well, we've already read the title and you've seen the intro, so without wasting any time, let's just jump into my in-depth comparison of the OnePlus 10T with the iQoo 9T. Let's get started. Alright, so let's kick things off by talking about the design here. Now, the OnePlus 10T goes for a very curvaceous design, while the iQoo 9T goes for trying to merge flat edges with a curved back. Now, in my opinion, the finish on the OnePlus 10T is annoyingly glossy and fingerprinty, and I'll be honest, feels a little bit cheap in comparison to the iQoo 9T, which is covered in matte for the most part. Adding on to that is there is a fine carbon fiber imprint on it as well, which really adds on to the premiumness. Now, while using the device in hand, I would say that the OnePlus 10T feels a bit more better and more comfortable. It has a narrower shape, making it easier to hold in one hand, and the curves all around make it quite ergonomic. Now, that is not to say that the iQoo 9T is not as ergonomic, but it's just a personal preference, and I personally do not like flat edges that much. However, the iQoo 9T is easily the more premium one as it merges metal sides with a glass back, while the OnePlus 10T goes for a plastic side with a glass back. So at the end of the day, I would say if you want a more premium design, the iQoo 9T is definitely the way to go. However, if you want a phone that's, well, slightly more comfortable to use, the OnePlus 10T might just suit your needs better. Now, moving on to the display part, you can see the specs on your screen, and for the most part, they are pretty much the same. Full HD 120Hz HDR10 Plus support on both of them. Of course, OnePlus claims 1000 Hz of touch response rate, while the iQoo 9T claims 1200 Hz of touch response rate, and the iQoo 9T also has a much better peak brightness. Now, I would say that in day-to-day usage, the peak brightness does not really make a lot of difference, but definitely it is noticeable that the iQoo 9T is a bit brighter. Other than that, in terms of color reproduction or content consumption, they're both excellent panels. Now, I'm not saying that OnePlus's panel is bad by any means. It's just that the iQoo 9T's panel is so much superior that it makes the 10T feel a bit inferior. To OnePlus's credit though, adding on to the content consumption part are the speakers, and they are slightly better on the OnePlus 10T thanks to a louder treble and details in the lower end. Alright, so far in terms of both the design and the display, we've seen while both the devices are neck to neck, the iQoo 9T has definitely been edging the competition. But what about the camera department? Well, let's take a look. As you can see, the camera specs are on your screen, and while they both come with a 50MP primary sensor, the iQoo 9T has a better set of aiding cameras thanks to a higher resolution 13MP ultra-wide sensor and a more practical 12MP telephoto sensor. On the other hand, the OnePlus makes use of an 8MP ultra-wide and a pointless 2MP macro sensor that nobody cares about. Talking about the real-world usage, let's start by talking about the main sensor. The shots from both the phones look great, but the approach to processing is very different on both the phones. See, if you want pictures which look closer to reality with very natural colors, the OnePlus 10T does it better. However, if you like vibrant images with a little bit of saturation and a lot of contrast, the iQoo 9T should be your choice. Again, HDR performance is excellent on both phones. However, I would say OnePlus's performance is slightly better as it makes a good balance between both shadows and highlights. As for details, they're both pretty much similar. Moving on to the ultra-wide sensor, and it's without a doubt that the iQoo 9T is much better. You get a better resolution and more data to work with, resulting in shots that look sharper, colorful, and immersive. Now, I'm not saying that OnePlus's 8MP sensor is trash or something like that, but the iQoo 9T's ultra-wide sensor is much better. Moving on to low light shots, and the iQoo 9T has this one in the bag easily. I mean, on the main lens, the shots are pretty impressive from the 10T, but the iQoo 9T just manages to expose shadows and highlights a lot better while making sure that there is not a lot of noise either. Moving on to selfies, I would argue that iQoo is significantly better in every aspect, whether it's colors, details, or sharpness, everything is just slightly better on the iQoo 9T. Now, I'm not denying that OnePlus's shots are good, but again, the iQoo 9T has a slight edge here. Now, moving on to videos, that is one area where I personally feel that OnePlus 10T is doing a better job. Now, even though the colors are very similar, it offers better stabilization, lower noise levels, and is slightly better with color shifting and does not crop in as much as the 90 does. Now, the good part here is that these are flagship devices and both the devices can shoot up to 4K at 60 FPS. Alright, so now let's talk about the performance part. Like I said, both the devices come with a Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 processor coupled with LPDDR5 RAM and all of those fancy features. And both the phones come with their own technologies of keeping the device cool. Now, in terms of benchmarks, as you can see on your screen, the phones are pretty much similar. Now, the reason why I say that is while the iQoo 90 does lead in terms of benchmark scores, the OnePlus 10T is better at sustaining performance as it throttled to 86% while the iQoo 90 went down to 78%. Regardless, in regular usage, the phones barely ever heat up, which is a massive improvement from the previous Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 processors. Now, while gaming, both the phones managed to offer the very best graphics available with maxed out frame rates and minimal heat. However, we all know that iQoo devices are better tuned for gaming, and I would personally also argue that the gaming experience on the iQoo 90 is slightly better in comparison to the OnePlus 10T. Now, of course, we also have to talk about software, which is a very important factor. It's Funtouch OS versus OxygenOS. Now, both the skins have their own advantages. Funtouch OS leads the way when it comes to updates and customizability. You also get more customizability options here, which is surprising considering that OxygenOS used to once have that role. But yeah, I would have to argue that Funtouch OS has been super stable and the updates have been so frequent that it's become one of my favorite skins out there. With all of that being said, you still can't deny that OxygenOS still looks amazing. I'm sure a lot of you guys might argue that okay, it's basically ColorOS, and while that is true, there's no denying the fact that even ColorOS in itself looks pretty good. And unlike the previous updates of OxygenOS on various devices, the OnePlus 10T has a relatively stable version of OxygenOS. The bloatware is also quite minimal, something that still remains a complaint on the Funtouch OS. Lastly, we have the battery life. The OnePlus 10T comes with a 4800 mAh battery with support for 150 watts of fast charging. On the other hand, the iQoo 90 has a smaller 4700 mAh battery with a slightly slower 120 watts of fast charging. Now, as far as charging is concerned, while they both charge at pretty much the same rate, the OnePlus 10T has a slight advantage here. But that's a negligible advantage. The bigger advantage is that OnePlus is making use of different technologies to ensure battery health and to ensure minimal heat. So in order to ensure the longevity of your battery and of course overall device as well. Now, as far as day-to-day usage and battery life is concerned, again, both the devices perform the same way. In our testing, both the phones offered 6 to 6.5 hours of screen on time, which is pretty good considering the overall horsepower that both the devices pack in. So, long story short, which device to pick? See, I think it's a relatively easier pick. Of course, OxygenOS still remains a fan favorite. Of course, OnePlus still has that brand value and is still a phone that you can flaunt to others. While the green finish on the OnePlus 10T definitely feels cheaper, I'm not saying comparing to the OnePlus 10 Pro, it obviously feels cheaper compared to the iQoo 90 as well. It's still a phone that you can flaunt to some extent. And of course, you get slightly better video quality as well. But honestly speaking, those are the only positives that I can find for the OnePlus 10T, especially when you compare it with the iQoo 90. With the iQoo 90, you get a more premium build. Of course, the design is subjective, but the build is far more premium. You get a more improved and a much better display. You get a better overall camera, especially if you're into photography. And you still get a long battery with fast charging. And like I said, Funtouch OS might not be everyone's taste, but at least it guarantees you frequent software updates. Something that is not to be guaranteed with OnePlus, as we've seen lately. So yeah, personally, I think I'll be going with the iQoo 90, but if you do decide to go with the OnePlus 10T, nobody's going to be judging you. It's still a great phone to buy. And well, that was it. If you found this video helpful, make sure to let us know by giving us a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel for more awesome tech content. Till then, this is One from GTR, and I'll see you in the next one.